All right. We're recording. This is our second webinar, finishing up week 2. And our topic this week is IDEA. And we've had our first case briefing. So that's due tonight. I hope everybody's finished with it by now. How was it, ladies? Those of you who are on the screen. Was it tough?
I had to read through it several times to really understand what exactly I was reading.
Yeah. Which one did you choose?
The one with Timothy.
Tanika, how about you? Which one did you choose?
Well, I'm still going through the first one, so
Okay.
it's gonna be that one. The reading and everything is seems just long, like really long. Like I can't seem to hardly get through it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so
There's a lot of it. Hi, Ashley. I'm glad you could make it tonight. I've already started recording. We're talking about this week's assignment, the case briefing. I was contemplating how many to assign this week, but maybe we'll just do another one instead of 2. Is that a good idea? Keep it to 1.
That'd be appreciated.
Okay, that's what we'll do then. I don't want to overwhelm anybody too much, so we'll keep it to 1 again. What we may do next week is give you a partner and kind of team up and compare notes, and then you can share some ideas. I think that's probably a good way to share some thoughts on not only how to do it, but what you get. And I don't want to overwhelm anybody too much, but I still want you to get the impact of a variety of cases. So there's Tina. Hi, Tina.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good. We're talking about this week's homework, our case briefing, and we'll go ahead and you have any comments about it before we dive into our PowerPoint?
I do not.
I'm not sure I heard what you said.
No, I don't.
Okay. All right, Melissa, how about you? You're muted right now, but do you have any comments about the case briefing? Was it a doable assignment for you or overwhelming? She may just. Oh, she's having issues. No, I have issues every day, Melissa. Just in life. But we'll excuse you, okay? Don't worry about it. We'll go ahead and move forward, and if you can join in with audio or video, great, and if not, don't worry about it. Maybe you can catch up later. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to talk about this week's PowerPoint. Oh, she said she followed one of the cases. I couldn't read what she wrote, though. Can somebody tell me what she wrote in the chat?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I studied the Rowley case.
Oh, okay.
The Amy Rowley case.
That's a great one.
Yes, and it took me a while to get through it, to digest it, but it was very interesting, and I can see the significance. It has to do with what the term appropriate means in the free and appropriate public education. And the parents, the little girl was hard of hearing, and she wanted a sign language interpreter, and the school district said no. The hearing said no. The courts of appeals said no. So the parents took it to the district court, and there they agreed with the parents. Well, then the school district took it to the Supreme Court, and from there the Supreme Court found that in fact, the school district was giving her what was intended with that act because she was getting benefit from her education, that it didn't have to be to the maximum extent, that if the student in special education is receiving services and they're able to benefit from that experience, then that's considered a free and appropriate public education.
Well,
So
you
that's
just,
kind of what I got from it.
you did that absolutely beautifully, just beautifully. And that's a case that it was established in, I believe it was 1982. Am I correct on that recollection?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
And so, obviously that's decades ago, and it has long been touted as a case, with lots and lots of merit, because it established this this concept of, what free appropriate public education really means. And what Melissa said just a second ago about that a district does not have to provide a student everything that they can, that's possible, so that the child can achieve to that maximum level that is possible. They just have to provide something, to the degree that it's an appropriate education. Well, that has come under fire in recent years, and just 2 or 3 years ago, a family in Colorado took that, basically challenged that, and said that our son, who had autism, this is the Endrew case, ENDREW. It's like Andrew with an E on the front instead of an A. And we will study that case as well this short semester, because it basically has taken what the Rowley case established and held for a really long time, like I said, decades, and has upped the ante somewhat. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the finding was that the school district had not done enough for this student, and the parents ended up taking him out of the public school and putting him into a private school where he could get more challenging, a more challenging IEP, and teachers and so forth who took his education to a further degree, a greater level than he was getting, challenged him more than he was getting in the public school. And if that case had been tried and compared at the same time and to the same degree as the Rowley case, the parents would not have been found in favor of that, because that Rowley standard was such that the school district would have been found in favor of and told, you don't have to maximize his opportunity. You can just, you have to provide the language that was used for a long time was a floor of opportunity. You just provide a floor of opportunity, and that's good enough. But the Endrew case, the Supreme Court found that wasn't enough. The school district had to do more than that. They had to provide more than just a floor of opportunity. And so things have changed in just the last 2 or 3 years since the Endrew case came around. And like I said, we'll talk more about that. But the Rowley case has been the standard for decades, and Melissa just capsulized it for us very nicely there. How about that Timothy case? Can you, Lindsay, can you tell us in just a couple of sentences what it was about?
Yeah, so Timothy W. is sounds similar to the Rowley case. He had multiple severe disabilities, though, from birth. He was born prematurely, and his mom wanted him to get services, and she kept trying to get him services. The school district kept saying no, they didn't. That he was unable to qualify for a special, and so he was too special for a special education, and so she took it to the school board, and then she ended up going up the court system also, and that ended up establishing the zero reject,
Yes.
that so that you can't disqualify a student because their disabilities are too right? All students are, they should get an education that's appropriate for them, no matter what their disability level is.
Great. Thank you so much. Now, do you remember the year that that was decided?
It started in the 70s, the late 70s, 80, was it 82, 83?
Okay, about the same then as the Raleigh case.
Yeah,
I had forgotten the year on that one, so thank you for the reminder.
you're welcome.
Okay. So we'll talk a little bit now about chapter 4. And like I said, on Canvas this week, this is really the foundation of it all. This is where the rubber meets the road for special education. And so you've got to get to know this this law and all of its quirks and parts. And those of you who are in the diagnostician program, we talked about a lot of this in class on Saturday, and all of you that are on the screen see are part of that group. And so this is going to start sounding familiar, and all the pieces will fit together with the things that we talk about in the law class and the things that you'll be learning there. And anything that you want to look at more deeply, you can always find IDEA in its pieces on the legal framework that we looked at on Saturday in class on that Region 18 website. So these are the learning objectives. I'm not going to go over those in any detail, but here's a really great quote. It's at the beginning of chapter 4, and this is really the foundation of this law. We must recognize our responsibility to provide education for all children with disabilities, which meets their unique needs. The denial of the right to education and to equal opportunity within this nation for handicapped children, whether it be outright exclusion from school, the failure to provide an education which meets the needs of a single handicapped child, or the refusal to recognize the handicapped child's right to grow, is a travesty to justice and a denial of equal protection under the law. And of course, we can recognize that as a rather dated quote because of the use of the word handicapped. We don't use that word handicapped to identify people with disabilities anymore. And it's not using person first language where we put the disability after the person so that we don't highlight that as their identity. But the sentiment is basically the same as what has carried through IDEA through the decades since its origin, and that is the responsibility of schools to educate all children, disability or not. And so, even though the language may change, the sentiment behind the law remains the same. So, the development of IDEA, well, we talked a little bit about this last week as we got into the history of IDEA in general and special ed in general. And that is, we've got these court rulings and legislation that all kind of blend in together. We had the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was born out of, like we talked about, a lot of civil rights efforts that preceded it. And then it was established during the Johnson administration in 1965. And that was followed by the Education of the Handicapped Act. Now, that was not a set of laws that drew out everything that had to happen. It was kind of the predecessor to the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, which came in 1975. It predated that in 1970 and gave some funding, some grant money to districts to states that would get the process kind of started. And then it was that 5 years later that we got what we really needed on the books in 1975 during the Gerald Ford administration. But those early court cases, some of which we'll talk about just briefly tonight, were what kind of spurred Congress on, and the court system, like I said last week, litigation spurs legislation. It gets the ball rolling when people file suit, and then the Supreme Court takes action. Then we have laws that follow. And then, of course, we had the passage of the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, which then later became IDEA in 1975. So what's the purpose and the structure of IDEA? Who is protected? Well, the children of our nation are the ones who are protected. And it starts off with children. Well, it began with children 3 through 21, and that's still who is served in our school systems. And that's who we're focused on in our program. IDEA in its broader sense, though, serves children birth through 21. And that's part C that we'll talk about here in just a second. The categories of disability. All of you on the screen right now were with me on Saturday when we talked specifically about those disabilities. I noticed that the page in your textbook that talks about disabilities, it's written from a national scale, and it's a little bit different. Of course, it doesn't have our Texas non-categorical NCEC in there. The little box I saw didn't even have developmental delay in it. So I'm not sure why Dr. Yell left that out, but as far as I know, it's still in there. Last time I checked, it was. But he listed deaf and hard of hearing. Well, he listed hearing deafness and hearing disability or hearing impairment as two separate things. And of course, here in Texas, we look at those together. But there may be, there are some subtle differences in other states as to how people look at those. But what we have in Texas, let's just rattle those off for the benefit of anybody that wasn't in our class on Saturday. I've got to jot them down so I make sure we hit them all. But let's just turn our mics on for a minute, and y'all go around the screen and just share one, and I'll make sure we get all 13. Okay, so this is a little bit of practice for us for the next time we get together in our 5329 class. Okay, so let's see if we can get all 13 listed in Texas. Now, these are our Texas disabilities. Lindsay, why don't you start us off?
Learning disability.
Learning disability. Okay, Tina.
Other health impaired.
Other health impairment. Okay, Tanika, can you give me one?
Visual impaired.
Visual impairment. Okay, Melissa, you got one for me?
Intellectual disability, ID.
Intellectual- Good, intellectual disability. Okay, Lindsay, back to you.
Emotional disturbance.
Emotional disturbance. Okay, Tina, your turn again.
Autism.
Autism. Tanika, your turn.
Multiple disabilities.
Multiple disabilities. Melissa,
Deaf, blind.
deaf, blind. Lindsay,
Orthopedic impairment.
orthopedic impairment. Tina,
Traumatic brain injury.
traumatic brain injury. Okay, we're getting down to the few that it's hard to remember. Tanika, you got one for us?
I don't even remember all of them that we just said.
Somebody help her.
Multiple,
I can-
Impairment.
multiple disabilities.
I
We've
said
already
that
said-
one.
We've already said
Oh, I'm
that one.
sorry.
Speech
Okay.
impairment.
Auditory.
Speech.
Auditory.
We've already said, oh, no, we haven't said that one. You're right.
Speech
Deaf or
impairment.
hard of hearing. Deaf, hard of hearing. Okay,
Speech impairment.
speech impairment, and we have one more.
Non-categorical early childhood.
Non-categorical early childhood. Okay, good. Okay, that's good practice for what we're gonna have to do the next time we get together for our 5329. But that's our categories of disability in Texas. Now, our age requirements, our school age population, 3 through 21. Now, it's not to 21, it's through 21, okay? So if you turn 21 on the first day of school, you get services for that whole school year. I'm sorry, if you turn 22 on the first day of school. You were 21 when school started, so you get services that whole school year. Okay, so I said it wrong. If you are 21 on the day school starts, you're eligible for services that whole school year. Okay. So it's the school year in which you turn 22. You get services that whole school year. So it's people who are age 3 from the day you turn 3, you're eligible for services that day until the school year in which you turn 22, and you're served that whole school year. Now, does everybody need services until they turn 22? No, not everybody does. A lot of people graduate when they're a senior, and maybe they're 17, maybe they're 18, maybe they're 19. Not everybody needs those adult services, but some people do. And if they are in need of that to finish the goals and objectives on their IEP, then we serve those people until they are 22. Okay, infants and toddlers. Those are children who are infants and toddlers, as I told you on Saturday, children who have visual impairments or any kind of auditory impairment, deaf or hard of hearing. We serve those through the schools, those 2 disabilities from birth. All the rest of the disabilities are served through Part C. Now, this is where we get down into the structure of IDEA. Part A is the section that kind of tells us how IDEA works. Part B is the school age part, the ages 3 through 21. Okay. Part C is the section for infants and toddlers, except for the 2 disabilities that we talked about that fall under the school section. So Part B is the school section. Part C is infants and toddlers. Now, you've probably heard of Early Childhood Intervention, ECI, which is a federal program. That's Part C. Okay. Now, in my head, it ought to be backwards. You ought to have Part C before you have Part B. I mean, you ought to have young children first, and then you have school age, but it's not that way. Part B is the school age, and Part C is the young children. And that messes with my mind alphabetically, To me, it ought to work with the age range, but it doesn't. The Part B is the school age, and Part C is the little ones. And then Part D is all of the extra stuff that gets funding, like research and things like that. So university programs that are researching disability and things like that fall under Part D. Now, that doesn't mean what I did not say is that university students who have disabilities are under IDEA. No. Professors who might be doing research that apply for a grant, that money would come out of Part D. This is all the funding part. And that's where the money comes from. Okay. But your book talks about that and kind of lines it out pretty well for you. So here are the principles of IDEA, Part B, the school part, the part that really involves us. And this is a good list. Now, I told you all on Saturday that there are, I think I said that when those of you who are going to be getting a master's degree will have to do your comprehensive exams next fall. And one of the questions that I usually ask is about the 6 pillars or the 6 primary principles of IDEA. Well, they're embedded on this list. And there's also a quiz question about that this week on your quiz. Those 6 principles are amongst these. Now, they are, let's see, even though 0 reject is a principle, it's not one of those 6. So don't check 0 reject. Free appropriate public education is one. There's another one that's not listed on here. The six principles aren't all listed here because IEP is one of them. So the 6 principles are identification and evaluation. That's something that children are guaranteed with with the provisions of IDEA. They're
Can you repeat what you just said? You're breaking up or something on my
oh, am
end.
I? Okay.
Mhm.
Am I any better now?
Yes.
Okay. The 6 principles, well, they're not all here, but there is a question on your test, on your quiz about that. So I'm just going to run down what they are, okay? FAPE, free appropriate public education, is one of the 6 principles. Identification and evaluation is another. An individual education plan, or an IEP, is one. Least restrictive environment is another. Procedural safeguards and parent participation. So I'm not sure where Dr. Yell got this list exactly. I mean, these are all things that are part of IDEA, but and zero reject is what we do, but that's not one of the 6. And technology related assistance, you know, kids are guaranteed that we look at AT, but that's not one of the 6. And personnel development, that's, you know, school related. So these are all important things, but and see, IEP is not on here. So identification and evaluation, free appropriate public education, least restrictive environment, procedural safeguards, parent participation, and then IEP is the 6th one. And that is on your quiz this week. So the IDEA originated in 1975, as we talked about, and then it has been revised several times. You do need to know on your quiz the original name of it. And we looked at that a second ago, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. And then it's been reauthorized several times. It was reauthorized, that those amendments came about in 86, 90, 97, and 04. And with each of those, some tweaks were made that made it better. The first ideation of it really just gave kids access to the school. And then with each revision, we've made it better and better so that students have access to general ed curriculum now. It's just improved with each reauthorization. So how do we fund it? Well, states get a portion of their money from the federal government. There's been a push for years to get full funding for IDEA from the federal government, and we're nowhere near that. I think we get about 40% of our special education needs paid for from the federal government, and the rest is left up to the state. And so there's been a big push for years to get IDEA fully funded, and I don't see that happening, you know, in the near future. I told you all that I have been going to Washington for years to speak to our congressmen and senators about what's going on with kids with disabilities in Texas. And there's always been a push for full funding, but we're so far from full funding that I don't think it's even logical to to request full funding when we're so far from it. I think it's more logical to request, smaller little bites of that great big elephant instead of the whole elephant. All of that is based on child count, and children need to be attending school for us to get what we need for those expenditures. So your book talks a little bit more about all of that. We've got the non-supplanting requirement, where schools are responsible for 75% of that, and the state kicks in another 25%. So money is coming from the federal government, the state, and the local. Now, there is a question about this on your test, your quiz this week also. Who does the monitoring and the provision of funds? Which department there at the Department of Ed? And the answer to that question is OSERS, the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services. And the way I remember that is that OSERS can say no, sir. OSERS can say no, sir. They're the ones with the okaying ability. They monitor and enforce. Then we've got the Office of Special Ed Programs. They put together the regulations for us. They're the ones who put out the guidance documents. And like I said, OSERS does the monitoring and funding. So we have the state performance plans. You've probably heard people in your district talk about the SPPs, or the state performance plans. If you're on the special ed side of things in your districts, the special ed people in districts get very anxious about these kind of things. Reports have to be submitted every year that monitor each one of these indicators, and they're listed here for you. The percent of students that graduate from high school, the percent of students who drop out, participation and performance of students on statewide assessments, the rate of suspension and expulsion of students who are in special education, who receive special ed services of some sort, the percent of students served inside and outside of the general education classroom for varying amounts of time. So is it 80% of their day that they spend in special ed? Is it 40%? Are they in a separate school altogether? The percentage of students attending a regular early childhood program or a separate special ed class altogether. So all of these things are documented and kept up with, and then reported by the school district to the state, and then to the Department of Ed. And then, of course, funding can be in jeopardy if a district has too many students in special ed in any one of these categories. The list continues. The percent of students who demonstrate improved positive social emotional skills behavior. The percent of parents reporting that the school facilitated parent involvement. The percent of districts with disproportionate representation of racial and ethnic groups in special ed. And this is an issue that has been prevalent over the years, is that we have more students of racial and ethnic minorities in special ed than are represented in the general population in school. And so this is something that schools have to work at, is identifying why that's true and then working to combat that. The percent of districts with disproportionate representation of racial and ethnic groups in specific disability categories. I don't know if I mentioned this in our Saturday class or not, but we have an overrepresentation of African-American males in our, I mentioned it in my summer class. I think that last time I mentioned it was that we have a disproportionate number of African-American males in our ID category, also in our ED category. And so that's something that you as future diagnosticians need to be aware of, that we tend to have more than our share of referrals in those groups, and then we tend to find them eligible more often than other groups. Percent of students who were evaluated within 60 days of receiving parental consent. So this is why diagnosticians get anxious about meeting timelines, because there's a reporting for this. And then the percentage of children referred by Part C, that's ECI, prior to age 3, who are then found to be eligible for Part B. The percent of students whose appropriate, measurable, post-secondary goals that are updated annually and are based on age-appropriate transition assessments and services. So these are looking at our students who are on the exiting end of the equation. The percentage of youth who are no longer in secondary schools, who were enrolled in high school and were competitively employed. General supervision system identifies and corrects noncompliance, and the percent of hearing requests that went to resolution sessions. So those due process requests and how well we are taking care of them. The percent of mediations held that resulted in mediation agreements. And the state reporting data are timely and accurate. So that's the end of our PowerPoint, and I will post that on Ashley, I left you out of that sharing while ago because you weren't on my screen. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I didn't see your face on my little column. I forgot you were there.
Yeah,
Oh, but
I'm
there's our,
multitasking, so it's fine.
we got our sweet boy there. He's listening in tonight. What a cutie.
Thank you.
It is a boy, right? He's a boy, right? Yeah, I thought you said he was a boy.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, he is.
Okay. Okay, what questions do we have? Anybody? About all the things that IDEA tells us to do? Mandates for us?
I guess I just have a question. What if a district is not in compliance with all of that list that you just went through? What if their percentages are high or they're not in compliance with those? Is funding cut or something because of it?
Well, not immediately. It can be eventually. What happens usually first is that if they're given several years to get things in order, and TEA first comes and puts the eyeballs on them and watches them, and if they just continue over a long period of time to be out of compliance, then they put a conservator over the district to basically come and whip them into shape. And there was a district outside of Dallas that continued to stay out of compliance, not just in special ed, but in lots of other ways too. They put in conservatorship like that a number of years ago, and it was in such bad shape that they eventually shut the district down and sent the kids to neighboring districts and just split them all up and let them be absorbed by other districts. So that would be the absolute worst thing that would ever happen. And I've never heard of that happening to a larger district. Larger districts have lots of measures to put things in order. And a few years ago, a couple of years ago, well, what districts are suffering with now is part of the problem that happened a few years ago when, well, let me back up a little bit more than that. TEA used to have a policy in place where they had a target that all districts were supposed to meet. We were supposed to have 8.5% of our special ed population, I'm sorry, of our school population in special ed. And I remember being working at the service center at that time, and then being over the diagnosticians in a district and then becoming the assistant director of special ed and then the director of special ed in a district when all of that was present. And we had a lot of pressure on us to maintain this 8.5%. And my district never got down to that, but we were getting close. But what happened was the people at the service center or TEA would tell us, okay, now you're too high. You need to get your numbers down closer to 8.5. Well, you've got a group of kids in your district. I was in Hearst Euless Bedford when I was a director, and we had about 2,000 kids in special ed. Well, you know, you can only do so much with the kids you've got. If you've got a certain number in special ed, it's because they have disabilities. We weren't actively searching out more kids than we needed to. But what happens is when somebody puts pressure on you that you've got too many, then I would hear diagnosticians say, okay, we need to start dismissing kids. We need to start dismissing so we can get that number down. And I would say, no, you don't dismiss kids that need services. Now, if somebody is, you know, receiving services that shouldn't be, they are meeting all of the goals on their IEP and they don't need support in special ed anymore, yes, we need to exit those students. But if we've got students that need services, we're not going to exit people because somebody thinks our numbers are too high. Well, the same is true on the other end of that spectrum. TEA would go and hound districts whose numbers were too low. And now it's hard to imagine that anybody's numbers would be too low, but there were a few districts whose numbers were low. And so then they would get pressure to identify more kids. Well, that's crazy. It's crazy that there's this number out there that somebody just pulled out of the air and said, here's our number. Because special ed numbers look different from one district to the next. We talked about this a little bit on Saturday when I was talking about giftedness. And the population of districts are different. Some districts do have more kids with emotional disturbance. Some districts have more kids with orthopedic impairments. Some districts have more kids with intellectual disabilities. You know, it's not all even across the state. And so what happened was some of the larger districts, the more urban districts in our state, got together. Houston ISD, Dallas ISD, San Antonio got together and complained to the Department of Ed in Washington about TEA. And they said, we've got a problem here. Our state agency has put this unrealistic expectation on us. And we believe that kids that need services are being discarded because of this unrealistic expectation. And the Department of Ed investigated and they said, we agree. And they cited TEA. They found them in, you know, I don't know the word I'm looking for, in violation, I guess, of what they should be doing. TEA then abandoned this expectation, this target number of 8.5, got rid of that altogether. There's now no longer this expectation. Well, what do you think happened? Numbers started going back up to a more natural expectation of around 10 to 12%. That's what statistically we would expect disability wise, about 10 to 12% of our population. But I remember when I was working at the service center, we had some districts who would have 15%. I worked with one district that had almost 20% of their population. Now that's really high when you have almost, you know, 1 out of every 4 kids has a disability. That's something fishy's going on there, you know, something's in the water. But about 10% is about right. That's about what we would expect. Because if you just leave people to their own devices, that's about what they were identifying, was about 10 to 12%. So that being said, if you let people do what they need to do and you don't put a lot of pressure on them to meet a certain number, I think people will, you know, generally do what they're supposed to do. But sometimes we have other factors that come in and, you know, we do have biases sometimes that work against us. And we'll talk about that more as we get into some of these other cases and chapters about the things that do impact us negatively. You know, language has been a huge issue, not just in our state, but in California and a bunch of the border states where we test a lot of children who are not native English speakers. And the test then is biased against the child who's taking the test. And we've had children who test as intellectually disabled because they didn't know the language of the test they were being assessed with. Well, I mean, duh, that's a no-brainer, you know. You test a child in their native language if you want to get an accurate IQ. So, you know, that's something that we'll talk about, you know, here and in our other class about, you know, some things that are just, you know, basic logic and not using some of those biases against people in the testing process. But these basic tenets of IDEA are guarantees that we've kind of come to over time as people have worked out the kinks of what's wrong with the law and have realized what needs to be there to really help children who have disabilities. I may not have answered your question very well, but
No, you did. Thank you.
that's kind of, you know, where we're trying to get with IDEA is to get to the spot where we do it better where we do it naturally without a ton of oversight. I think a lot of district administrators, special ed administrators, feel a lot of pressure with all these state performance plan indicators and things like that, you know, all these expectations. But if you let people, if you give them time and space to do their work well, most of them get it done and meet the expectations that are there. Anybody else?
I have a comment about my week.
Yes, ma'am.
I had an IEP meeting this week. And for the first time, I was in a meeting where I felt like I understood what was going on. I
Really?
understood when they were talking about the why the kid qualified, and they talked about the two categories under the idea, and then all of the other things that how they qualified under the 8 areas of cognition, the 2 where he qualified there. So I felt like I knew what was happening in this meeting this time. So that made me feel good.
Isn't that fun when it starts to click like that? I love that.
Yes.
I'm so glad you shared that, Tina. That's great. All right. Well, the quiz will be open here in just a little bit, and then I'll open up the assignment for this week. We'll do another case briefing. I'll give you a few more choices of cases to choose from, but we'll just do one again this week, okay? So I don't overwhelm you too much, but I want you to kind of get the hang of that and do some analysis and see what we're working with on the legal side of things. And I hope I see some of you back here next Wednesday, and I'll see all of y'all the following Saturday. Okay. All right. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns, and I'll see you soon. Okay. Y'all take care.
Bye,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Kevin. Thank you.
Bye-bye.